Doing live. Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to pop a quick disclaimer on the screen. This is just to say that this event will be recorded and sent to our YouTube live channel. If you prefer not to be recorded, we ask that you kindly leave now, and if possible, please mute and disable your videos whilst the event is going on. Thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. We are very honored to have Kirsty today as our first event for the UK Fashion Open Studio schedule. Kirsty is a woven textile designer, and she's been working with some of the most known and most strong brands around. She will tell you more, and then she will run a workshop and a studio tour. Kirsty, to you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my studio. I hope everyone's okay in these slightly strange times. I'll just introduce myself. I've worked for about 18 years in woven textiles in many sort of different capacities. So through education, through the studio system, and in manufacturing. I've actually just moved into this space. I started a new business, great timing, at the end of February, and now, you know, everything has sort of kicked off. So I'm currently in a kind of state of really kind of rethinking about my practice and rethinking about woven textiles and its role within the fashion industry. So firstly, woven textiles is an absolutely enormous industry. It's often kind of quite overlooked or not really talked about. If you think about what you're wearing, pretty much most of your wardrobe is woven. Your shirting, the denim jeans that you wear, the dress fabrics, it's all woven, and there's a huge industry behind that. Even sort of surrounding you in a room, your towels are woven, your upholstery is woven. It really is a very large industry, and practice in woven textiles really, you know, from small studios like this, where people are kind of weaving on an artisan basis, to sort of vast international factories and everything in between, from designer makers to designer manufacturers. As I said, it kind of, it's quite hidden, it's quite under the radar. I was just saying to Filippo, we're a little bit like the drummer in the band, but then I was thinking maybe we're actually more like the roadies, because we're sort of working on these raw materials, and there's a huge amount of design and thought that goes in to woven textiles. But I think the general public often just think it just kind of appears from nowhere. You press the button and out comes fabric. Also, when dealing with a lot of my clients in the industry, it's quite interesting to realize even kind of fashion buyers in very big companies have a very little understanding of how their fabric is made, the processes behind it. So I'm going to just talk through a few different sort of aspects of that today. In the UK at the moment, there's still a large number of mills in operation producing all types of fabric, from really high-end, amazing kind of woolen luxury fabric to factories that are working with technology. There's amazing factories out there that are working in a much more sustainable capacity in the development of new material. There's a lot of small studios like my studio. My studio is just me and Sally Holditch, who is the senior designer, who is currently working from home. So we're kind of everywhere, permeated through the fashion and the interior industries. I put an Instagram notice out saying, you know, to the weaving community, saying, can I, you know, let me know if I can mention your studio. There's too many of us to mention, actually. You know, all over the country, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. And so I'm really just looking today to sort of demystify, I guess, the woven textile, the role of woven textiles. I mean, I guess just shortly before we start looking at some pieces of fabric, I think the woven textile industry has had a huge impact, good and bad, on how we live now. I mean, it was really one of the drivers of the Industrial Revolution, and the phrase "Britain's bread hangs by a thread" indicates the financial importance that the industry once had. A really complex and laborious process. Sadly, I can't go through absolutely every aspect of it with you today, because it can take up to 2 days to prepare a warp, dress the loom, thread the loom, and then after that you can start weaving. Yeah, there's a lot of time. There's no instant gratification with weaving, sadly, as I'm a very impatient person, so I don't know how I managed to get into this. It's very complex. I mean, I think often people talk about weaving, or well, I guess the jacquard loom was the basis of Charles Babbage's difference engine. So the loom, in a way, is really a precursor to the computer, and it's a kind of early form of coding in some ways. Just for example, this is the language that we read, that we use to work from, which kind of does look a bit like computer coding. So what I'll do now is just kind of talk to you a little bit about the kind of work that I and many others in weaving studios do in terms of the fashion industry. So to begin with, we do quite a lot of hand weaving. So we weave really special kind of artisan couture pieces, working directly with fashion brands and fashion designers. So recently, with my previous studio, Rare Thread, we worked on 2 looks. I'm doing this at the kind of old school DIY way, because I'm not quite sure how to do it on Zoom, for Givenchy Couture. And this was a really complex task, because we were weaving a dégradé fabric. And when you're hand weaving, and multiple people are hand weaving, you're beating the fabric, and everybody has a different beat. So if you imagine a dégradé, some people are beating it like that, and some people are a little bit more relaxed. So we had to make 40 identical panels, woven by multiple people, and it was really quite a tricky job with lots of prototyping. This is an example of the kind of one of the pieces that didn't work. So it's really kind of working out the build-up and the layers of fabric. But it was a really exciting process. We work directly with the team to discuss the materials. To begin with, we would sample on a small scale combinations of texture, colour, yarn, that kind of thing. Also worked quite a lot with the fantastic Matty Bovan. So this piece here was, I'm really obsessed with houndstooth. So this was my chance to try and make the biggest houndstooth that I could imagine. We worked incorporating kind of lots of bits of waste fabric in this as well. It's a kind of really huge but light, very impactful fabric. And again, the way of working with Matty is a lot through WhatsApp, sending photos, sending inspiration, this kind of sharing of ideas, and then developing something that the client likes, and then you weave the meterage, and then they turn it into a garment. Also worked on material development as well, so kind of interesting projects that I've done in the past, also through Rare Thread. It's a project with Fendi, so it was about the material development of a new type of faux fur. I think they recognise the need for really sort of furs in natural fibres, rather than the kind of poly alternative in faux fur. And that project is really technical. You know, it's about the combinations and the finishing processes, the brushing of kind of different wools and raw silks, working directly on the jacquard. You know, it's an outerwear fabric, so it needs to sort of drape and feel in a way like, you know, like real fur. And I think it was just really interesting to sort of to research that and to work through it and to problem solve. We did something similar for Vuitton, which was creating very long fur, but it was all kind of inlay of organza silk. More recently, I've been working with people like Westwood Couture and also Louise Gray on how to reweave and use their offcuts to create new types of fabric. So some kind of quite crazy things here for Louise, but just sort of ways of integrating waste fabrics from the pattern cutting process into a new woven textile. Okay, so I think also in woven textiles, you're designing not just a look, you are designing a functionality. So you are sort of engineering really a piece of fabric to perform, drape, cut in a certain way. So also what we do is we create prototype samples within the studio that we sell to different customers. So we can be working on very, very fine things like this really beautiful hand-painted organza. And people would buy this as an idea for a shirting, or maybe an underwear company would buy something like this. But we're really, it's not just about the look, it's about the behavior of the fabric. A lot of thought goes into that. So kind of outerwear, tweed ideas. Some more kind of samples here. So we sell these things, these samples, as the client will buy them. This is a sort of denim jacquard fil coupe. Client will buy the sample and then they will use it as inspiration, and they will maybe translate it for manufacture. Okay. Also, we work with mills. So we work sort of directly with larger scale mills on consultancy, so working with them on design. If they've got a particular market they want to reach, we will design around that. Also Dashing Tweeds, which is a company that I've been involved with for quite a long time, since about 2006. So we make tweed fabrics that are kind of almost entirely in wool, some with reflective, and we get these manufactured in Scotland. So everything that we do with Dashing Tweeds is woven on the loom, and then we send it up to the mill with the tickets to Robbie, who will then weave up 200 to 300 meters. Designing for manufacture is a whole different ballgame from designing in a kind of bespoke hand-woven way, because there's so many different constraints in terms of supply chain, in terms of what materials are available and what the technical ability of working on certain industrial looms are. So it's a very different way of working. So I think in all this and at the moment, and in terms of what's happening with COVID and what's happening in terms of climate change, there's been a lot of questioning about, even on this small scale, what we do here and how we manage to use our influence, our inspiration that we produce in terms of, you know, working with larger clients. And that's something that is a bit of a minefield, and something that we're constantly sort of questioning. And you know, the whole idea about sustainable materials is an absolute minefield for weavers. It changes on a daily basis, and it's really hard to find your way through and decipher, you know, should you be buying organic cotton if it's flown over from India? Do the mordants used in vegetable dyeing render it unsustainable? Water usage, there's so much to get through. Is localism the answer? It's really difficult, and I think, you know, what I'm feeling about it is, at the moment, is that that the work that I do in terms of sample selling is really starting to work with materials that will influence the customer to use more sustainable materials in larger scale manufacture. A totally new concept or idea that I've been working on during this lockdown. It's probably not a totally new concept, to be honest. I'm sure there's other people working in this way. In fact, I know there is. But I'm looking at this idea using my skills and experience and connections in the higher end fashion industry to produce a collection called Reweave. And that's really because I've had a couple of projects recently where the company supplies me with their waste fabric. It's looking at really kind of new and sophisticated ways of using that waste, so everything doesn't look like a rag rug. I love rag rugs, but a rag rug is a rag rug. So what I'm planning to do is to design a range of prototypes, almost using particular techniques that can be shown to my customers, and we can then work out which things they like, which weights they like, which techniques, and then we can work out together how to use their waste fabric within the fabrics, the new fabrics that they're creating. This will start off very much as a hand-woven process, but eventually what I'd be really interested to do is transfer this into small-scale manufacture, and that's going to be difficult and going to require a lot of research and development. But yeah, I think it can be done, and it's good thing for me to concentrate on at the moment, to be honest. So now I've told you a little bit about the type of work that I do here and that many other woven textile studios do in the UK. I'm just going to, this might be a bit funny as I take you around the studio. The studio is a little bit bare because I ordered a large production loom, and that was just about 2 or 3 days before lockdown, so obviously that's in delay. But I'll just talk a little bit about the process, starting with yarn. So it's just a kind of small selection of yarns that I have here. So I'm going to take some of these back to the desk. I think what many people don't realise about the whole process of woven textiles is that there is a huge industry in yarn. So this yarn here will have had months and months, possibly years of research and development. The yarn companies release new yarns each season, which all require, you know, how much are they twisted? How do they get the machine to get this little kind of nip in it? How springy is it? What's it going to be, you know, what's its best use? Even in kind of things like this, which may look quite plain, there's a huge amount of research and development and a vast industry again in the making and the design of yarn. And that, you know, the process is it's very interesting, and they're releasing new things quickly every season. I'm going to take you to the loom now. So, okay. And 1 second, I'm just going to grab something. So this is my sample loom here. You can see it. That's a little bit better. So once you've chosen your yarns, and again, I'm sorry, I can't go through this whole process today. I know that some of you, I recognise some names, and I know that some of you are weavers. So you dress the loom, you thread the heddles, you put the yarns through the reed, and then you can actually sort of start weaving. So I'll just do a little bit. So once you've got the warp on, you can use anything in the weft. And I think for me, the process of weaving is something that kind of organises me. I'm a very kind of quite a messy and chaotic person in some ways. So having this sort of sense of order is amazing. So as talked about, once there's the yarn design, there's the actual weaving of the fabric. In the studio, that happens on this loom. And in industry, the weaving of the fabric obviously happens on kind of really massive industrial looms. The next process after weaving is finishing, and that's a whole different ball game. So the finishing process often happens in a completely different finishing plant, and it involves things like washing, scouring, brushing, shrinking, all those different things, and it makes the fabrics beautiful. It really, a fabric that hasn't been finished, just the difference that it makes is really incredible to how the fabric feels. So what I'm going to show you now is a little bit of DIY weaving from home. And I have here my frame loom. You can see that. So what you can use, you could use a picture frame. This, I think, it was languishing at the bottom of a bag somewhere in the studio. I think I must have bought this online at some point to sort of demo on, and it's a little frame or tapestry loom. So, but you can, you know, if you don't want to buy something, you can make a frame. It's basically just a frame, and you can kind of attach it together, glue it together, nail it together. Make sure it's fairly slim on this side. The first thing that you need to do is warp up your frame loom. If you're making your own, you can put a series of nails across the top. There are some, I think, quite good online tutorials about doing this. So it might be an idea, if you're interested in doing this at home, to look at one of those. And then what you need to do is warp it up. So you need these equal spaced hot warp yarns, and then you can start weaving. What I normally do at the beginning is just a couple of picks, and what you can use string, household string for this, or you can use any kind of strong filament that you have. So usually what I do is just attach the two bottom, put it again in string, attach two to the side, so you're kind of tensioning this out at the edges. And then it's a case of kind of simple weaving. And I've just used here things, I've actually made some fancy yarns in a very Blue Peter way out of J-cloth. And you can do things like kind of fringe your yarns, use old scraps of things that you have. You can start to do things, oh, there we go, you know, where you're kind of cutting into things to get texture. It might be that you start to really develop your own yarns through maybe binding something like this with some string, so you get these kind of knobbly effects. These are just sort of ripped up pieces of silk that I had in the studio. So I think the world is your oyster, really, in terms of the yarns that you use. And then to begin with, it's really simple. What you want to do is go under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, and so on. And then the opposite way, over, under, over, under, over, under. So I'm going to just do a little bit. This is quite, if you don't have want to use your fingers, you can make a little shuttle out of a piece of cardboard, which has got two notches in the side, and then you can sort of wind your material around that and use that to weave with. So it's, you can see here the green. So under, over, under, over, under, over. Slightly awkward, it'd be better at a table. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. Okay, you can see. And then what to do is get a fork and just beat down so that you get the line there. You can start to build this up. I mean, I think what's quite nice about this, and I quite really enjoy it, I haven't done this kind of thing for quite a long time. And I sort of like the idea as well of making your own frames and using the frame as part of the piece. You can do things like build up colour in some areas and not in others. You could have lots of, you know, where you're just almost kind of making fringing by just having pieces that maybe are only wrapped around one or two areas of the warp and come out. And I think it's quite a nice opportunity to use things that you have at home to to sort of start building up colour and texture. So cutting it off, I think, is you need to kind of cut it off and then knot each two together, and then your piece will hold. So that's a way. If you need any more information about this, maybe I can find a way of speaking to you about it at some point. But I think there's quite a lot that you can do. You can look at online. I think sort of to finish now, before we take some questions, I'm just sort of really thinking just now about what the future holds. And I think the first 2 weeks of lockdown, I think many small businesses were probably a little bit in shock. I'm thinking, wow, right, okay, and I think there's been quite a lot of good things that have come out of this. I mean, I think the sense of communication and community and sort of problem solving together is something that's quite exciting. It feels like a lot of barriers have been broken down, and the weaving community is quite a close-knit one. The way that we conduct meetings will change, I think. So it's a lot of Zoom meetings, and it's finding a way of how do you show a customer a woven fabric when 50% of what they're looking for is the touch and the drape and that kind of thing. And there needs to be new and novel ways, I guess, of showing texture and weave on screen. I think there will be a huge shifts in the industry, and maybe a lot for the better. But then it's thinking about all those people who are working in mills and the effect that it might have on their livelihood on the larger scale mills. And I think as small suppliers, what we can do is try and influence in which way we can, material choice and sort of ways of doing things. So I think that's pretty much it from me just now, but I'd love to, if any of you have any questions, I'd love to open it up for a chat. I can see some down here. Oh, they're coming in. Okay.
So there is no question on YouTube. So questions are now on the chat, but whoever is looking this on YouTube, watching this on YouTube, please, if you have any question, just drop them in the chat in YouTube, and then we can report to Kirsty.
Great. Shall I just work my way through the questions from the top as they come in? So Sophie, hi Kirsty, do Dashing Tweeds only use UK mills? Yes, so I think part of Dashing Tweeds ethos really was to work very locally, and we still continue to weave pretty much everything in the borders of Scotland. So from Fashion Revolution, when you sell samples to companies, do you go to trade shows or have you developed, that's from Christina, developed relationships with companies? I go to trade shows, but also I think because I've been in the game for quite a long time, I've developed very close relationships with customers and friendships, I think, as well. Yeah, I think that kind of really helps. I really enjoy the meeting side of it and the collaboration side of it, and the talking through ideas in terms of textile development. And yeah, so trade shows we have done before, been kind of Primivision, the kind of larger scale trade shows. Sophie is using a mini sample at home at the moment. That's good, Sophie. The mills must still be open. No, the mills are not open in the UK, and other mills I work with outside the UK are not open. So no fabric, unless I think it's for urgent PPE needs, is really being woven currently during lockdown. So that's all on hold. The whole supply chain is on lockdown. So where do we source yarns from? So from a lot of different places, really, and it depends on the project. So we can source very specialist yarns from Japan or Italy. We can source yarns from the UK. Not a lot of raw material is actually made in the UK, so a lot of wool, even if it's Shetland or is actually from New Zealand or Australia, but it's spun in the UK. There has been a resurgence in the use of British wool. It's a difficult one because it's heavy and quite scratchy. There are some spinners such as Laxton's, I think, who are working on new types of British wool yarns and trying to get them to be a little bit finer and that kind of thing. Small loom. I'd love to start weaving for. Sorry, Naomi. No experience. Do you get to do much experimental weaving just for pleasure? Well, no, I do. I think. I mean, it's been really strange on lockdown because I thought, oh gosh, this will give me the chance to go back to just making and enjoying making, but every time I start something, I'm like, what's the point? I don't know, I think I'm still getting my head around that, but I hope to weave for pleasure a bit more. And Naomi, I would encourage you as well to just start off with a frame loom and start sort of experimenting with that. Betsy, age 9. I'd like to know what's the biggest piece of cloth you have woven yourself, and how long did it take you, and who was it for? So I think I hand wove. I think actually for Givenchy I hand wove about 40 meters. Not just me, actually. I have to say there was other people involved. Yeah, about 40 meters, and the width was about 1 meter. Okay, Sophie. Hi, Sophie. It's nice to see you or read you. Can bring to interdisciplinary. That's a really good question. What do you think weavers can bring to interdisciplinary collaborations? I think that weave thinking is a really interesting way of thinking. You're thinking in structure. It's been described as a form of soft engineering before weaving, because you're looking at how a yarn travels in kind of multiple ways through another system of yarns, as you know very well, Sophie, because you're an amazing 3D weaver. But I think the thinking that we employ in kind of soft engineering can be applied to lots of different disciplines. And it feels like at the moment that other design industries are actually cottoning on to this thing called weaving and textiles, and that's quite interesting. So I mean, I've worked on projects with new materials before where there's been a mix of scientists, architects and engineers, and it's really, the collaboration is really trying to find a way of communicating together, because I don't really necessarily understand huge amounts about polymer science, but then they've got very little understanding of how to create a double cloth. So I think there's lots of exciting ways that weaving can be brought to interdisciplinary collaboration, and it just involves research and time spent talking and time spent understanding what each discipline can give to a particular project. Okay, Christina, where your inspiration comes from, what to keep your eyes open for? I think I haven't actually produced a sketchbook for a long time. I still paint a little bit, but I'm really inspired, I guess, by a multitude of different things, whether it's nature, whether it's a sort of texture that you find on the street. I'm very inspired by new yarns as well. I'm kind of inspired by classic couture textiles, I think, as well. So I do look at a lot of books and sort of look at interesting techniques, you know, maybe from vintage or archive fabrics as well. I think it's really exciting to see the work of all the other studios and woven makers and researchers on Instagram, and that is a sort of source of inspiration in kind of seeing how much breadth there is in woven practice. Yeah, we see some more of your reweaving samples. Oh yeah, I'll talk through that. I'll just run over and get them. Bear in mind that they are in development at the moment, but these are kind of examples of how you can integrate offcuts from pattern cutting into fabric. So I'm just going to run and grab them. So this is a kind of idea for a jacquard. It's actually a leopard print, and it's using sort of shredded chiffon as a weft. Once again, with the shredded chiffon, I mean, the idea in the end is that there's quite a lot of good recycled wool fabrics out there, yarns out there at the moment. So it's kind of using a base in recycled fabrics and then sort of integrating the offcuts in different ways. Obviously, this is kind of quite frou-frou, but I'd be kind of looking at developing a kind of range of looks. So not everything looks sort of hyper couture.
Kirsty?
Yes.
I have a question from Sophie on YouTube. She's saying,
Yes.
hi, Kirsty. What do you
Sophie.
think weavers can bring to interdisciplinary collaborations?
Filippo, I think I've answered that.
Okay, sorry.
Already. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah,
Perfect.
don't worry.
Sorry, I was on a call. I was distracted.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay, sorry, guys.
So here's something as well, which is made from a lot of different kind of fabric offcuts. Some kind of gingham yarns here, and then sort of ribbon yarns. So I think also trim ideas. So this is made from fabric, and the idea of kind of creating a trim. I think it would be interesting to look also at interior products in this way as well. And I think this will probably be my focus for the next few months, really, on lockdown, is to really sort of develop these prototypes that can be shown to customers, and that we can work out a way of using their waste and their offcuts on that. Are there any more questions? Are we is that it? Any more questions? Oh, thank you for saying the fabrics are fabulous, Naomi and Mary. But if there's no more questions, I'd like to use, okay, Marie or Marie, if I weave a small piece, I'd like to use it for an example as a patch or something. How should I, okay, how should I finish it not to break it after 5 minutes? Okay, so what you need to make sure of is, so when you weave your patch or your piece, is that you really properly beat it down so that it's quite dense. The looser it is, the more likely it is to fall apart. Also, make sure when you cut it off that you tie a knot in each end, or you tie 2 together at a time. What you can also do, Marie, is set, if you make a frame loom yourself, the closer you set the yarns together, the denser and more hard wearing that will be. So you can set them quite densely, and then just make sure you really pack it down, and that should give you something that's quite durable. It might take you a little bit of experimentation to get the density and hard wearingness that you want to, but that's something that maybe you can work towards. Okay, so oh, Christina, how closely do you work to trend forecasts? So not really at all. I mean, I've worked in the past with trend agencies to create samples for their trends, but personally, I think it's probably more, you're as a textile designer, you're right at the beginning of the industry, so people are you know, fashion designers are often using the fabric as inspiration. So I tend not to work to trend and to sort of create my own ideas and research, and like I said, I think that comes from all over, really, whether it's film, nature, architecture, all those things. So Sophie, how long has Dashing Tweeds been going on? So Dashing Tweeds started in 2006 actually, so that's a long time. And yeah, we can't produce, obviously the mills are shut, so nothing's in production at the moment, but I think we're looking at ways of, we have fabric in stock, so what do? We make a small range of menswear as well, so what do we use with stock fabric? You know, I think a lot of fashion brands are looking at the fabrics that they have and looking at reusing fabrics from past seasons to sort of create garments. Hey, anything else, anybody? Any other questions? Nope. Oh, Filippo, sorry, the larger loom, I'm afraid. Well, I can show you around this loom, but the large loom that the production loom I had ordered just before lockdown is not here. Obviously, it couldn't get through. But what I will do is I will show you a little bit more into the inner workings of the loom, so you can see how it's threaded up. So I'm hoping you can see this here. So these are the shafts. These metal needles here are the heddles. So each yarn is threaded through a specific heddle in a specific order, and that helps to create the pattern of the fabric. This thing here is called the reed, and that's when you're designing a fabric, you're designing its density. We've kind of touched on this. You know, it's like when people talk about 100 thread count Egyptian cotton, that means that there's 100 cotton yarns in each inch of fabric. And that makes for a really dense and sort of hard wearing fabric. So the density, this thing here, the reed, sort of helps you to sort of create the density that you want in the fabric, which is really important. Obviously, if they're really wide apart, then you get a very kind of a loose fabric. It's not very suitable for things like tailoring. So I think also I can show you around the back of the loom a little bit. This is the, it's a partially computerized loom. So all the structures, the lifting patterns are programmed in here, and then the pedals, sorry, it's not very tidy. Pedals are used to operate the loom. Okay, so this is it from the back. There's a whole other process called warping, in which you make this series of really carefully carefully arranged threads. But I think for today and the timing, there's not really, as I said earlier, it can take up to 2 days to fully dress the loom. But this, if anyone's interested, if anyone really enjoys the frame weaving, you can start this kind of very small table loom here. They're not wildly exposed, they are quite expensive, but if you get really into it, the next step from a frame would be a table loom, I think. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you, Kirsty.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much. It's been really, really, really nice to be with you this morning. Very informative. And I think, I mean, the audience was quite participative. You give a lot of insight on your work. There is a lot of thank you coming up on the chat. So from us and from everybody, thank you, Kirsty. And hopefully next time we're going to follow up with more insight from your studio.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Filippo. Thank you to
Thank you, Kirsty.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.